Welcome to another episode of Systematic Geekology. This is a space where we seek to create and cultivate healthy conversations between those things we geek out on and the philosophical and theological questions that often arise out of our fandoms. Like, what does it mean to be human? What makes a hero? What makes a villain? How do the stories and narratives we geek out on shape how we live in the world? We are your priest to the geeks. We aren't all ordained, but we see ourselves as mediators at the intersection of geek culture and going deeper in our faith. We don't always have to agree, but we do respect each other, and we see everyone as a beloved child of God. Everyone geeks out on something, so come geek out with us and enjoy the show.
You're listening to an Anazal Ministries podcast.
What is it about humans that fear that which is different and unique? And why do humans feel like they have to play this lifeboat game where they have to prove themselves worthy to stay in the lifeboat? Well, we're going to answer these questions and go into them with some of our favorite geeky fandoms. Welcome to another episode of Systematic Geekology. Welcome, Geekologist. I am one of your hosts, Will Rose, sometimes called AKA Wilbo Baggins or the Wilver Surfer or many other things. And we're coming up on 300 episodes. We're creeping up on 300 episodes in the podcast realm with Systematic Geekology. And I'm really proud of the conversations that we have. There's going around our conversations around the theological and philosophical with the fandoms and all that we geek out and nerd out about. And this episode is going to be no different because this is a part of our series of primarily political. It's an important election year. And so we are talking about the politics and the tension of politics within our fandoms and how that mirrors or relates or is a part of our world that we navigate on our own here in the real world. So tonight we are going to talk about primarily political, some of our fandoms such as comic books and superheroes with X-Men, Inhumans, Eternals. I know the X-Men is one of my chief fandoms and what got me into comics and geekology, if you will. And I can't do this alone. So I brought in a friend who I know loved the X-Men, and we've geeked out about it before. You've heard him on Comic Book Catch Up, Dr. Walsh. We have Andy with us today, our resident X-Men expert. And I don't know if he's an expert with Inhumans or the Eternals. I know a little bit about it. I don't know if he does, but we're at least going to talk about it a little bit and how it relates to politics and our faith and our fandom and all those things. Andy, how are you doing? What's happening?
I'm doing pretty good. Well, thanks for having me on again.
Yeah. So do you know much about the Inhumans? Have you done a deep dive?
I do not know as much about the Inhumans as I know about the X-Men.
Right.
I have, read most of the recent stuff. I keep track of a lot of Marvel stuff on Marvel Unlimited. The Inhumans versus the X-Men and all the lead up to that. Right. When the Inhumans were a big thing, when they were trying to make the Inhumans happen about 5-8 years ago, whenever that was, when the X-Men were licensed elsewhere and they wanted to make things happen for properties that Disney wholly controlled. I followed all of that. I did watch all 8 episodes of or however many episodes it was. If it wasn't that many, it seemed like that many at least, of the live action show. So, I've paid my dues to some extent with the Inhumans.
Nice, nice. And I know the Eternals with that too. Like we'll talk about that in a little bit. Like, yeah, you and I are both like huge X-Men fans. And when Disney was trying to figure out with the toys in their toy box what they were allowed to use or not use in terms of the big MCU, they played around with Inhumans, they played around with the Eternals, and it looks like we're going to get the X-Men in the MCU. That's going to be the next big phase. It's a good time to be an X-Men fan, I think, when it comes to comics and cartoons and what's potentials out there for the MCU. And so yeah, but I think the Inhumans and Eternals are in the same kind of family tree, or akin to the X-Men in terms of how they are seen as heroes or not, and how they wrestle with their powers or not, and what they're doing out there, and yeah, and the politics around these characters when it comes to how the public thinks of them, how politicians think of them in this fictional fandom world. But it's not far off to what we do in our real world when it comes to those people who are different than us, who are more unique than us. So we'll talk about those things, and I'm excited to do that. But before we do that, Andy, what are you geeking out on these days?
I think the biggest thing right now, we just finished the first season of the Foundation TV show on Apple with
Okay.
my son and my wife. We were watching it, and that was really interesting. Um, from what I remember, a pretty big departure from the book series or the
Mm.
book, but explore some interesting themes, and has some cloning, which is a popular comic book trope, right?
Yeah.
Some
Yep.
other big kind of it's really grand scale sci-fi, at the like galactic level. What are the implications for some of these different sci-fi ideas? And so
Yeah, I
that's
think
pretty cool.
it's pretty legendary in the sci-fi world. Yeah, was this like a book that even predates like Dune and other places? Wasn't it kind of like it's been around a while and they've finally made it into like a show? I'm not
Yeah,
quite
so
sure.
Asimov, I want to say the
Mm.
50s, right, were the original Foundation books. Um, so yeah, those are some of the temptation is to say foundational science fiction texts.
Yeah, yeah. There you go. The foundational of it. Yeah, I've heard good things, and I'm a sci-fi fan, and there's a lot of content out there. I haven't got to it yet. Have you checked out Three Body Problem yet? Have you heard about this show?
I've heard about it. It is high on my list, but I was traveling last week and my wife was not with me, so that was something that's something we would want to watch together. So hopefully this
There
week
you
we'll
go.
get to that.
Good TV and geeking out fidelity. I admire that. Yep, I'm in the same situation in our family and household too. But I read the book a few years back and I loved it. I couldn't put it down, and so I was excited to put this at the top of the queue for my watching as well. Coming off a Holy Week and Easter, I was like, man, I just haven't gotten around to it. But watched the first episode last night and I loved it. And I think it's going to have some implications when it comes to faith and science and this whole buzzword around faith, deconstruction, reconstruction. This show tends to do that with science too. What if everything you knew about science was wrong, and you have these scientists who are deconstructing how they understand the world and worldview because of it? So I think it's got some good things there that hopefully we'll lift up on an episode pretty soon. I'll name another thing that I'm geeking out on, and that is a podcast that my daughter recommended. Hannah, she's been on an episode with us, and she kind of picks on me for how many podcasts that I listen to. And I was like, I don't need another one, but she's like, Dad, I found a podcast I really like. It's called Ologies, and it's Allie Ward is the host, and she's really good. It's edited really well, and really all the ologies that are out there, the science behind the things in our normal world, whether it's pelicans or taste buds or the digestive system, or even like what the science behind why we are disgusted by some things and not other things. So really interesting. I love it. I started following her on Instagram and the show, and I got a long to-do list when it comes to listening and catching up with ology. So it's really good. So all you science fans out there, check it out. And we're going to talk about some sciences here. We're going to talk about some science because man, yeah, I hate it that it's this way, but science can often become politicized as well, as we know that pretty well, right, Andy? and so yeah, this is our part of our primarily political series and themes, and so we've been asking this question. I've been listening to our other hosts talk about theirs, but this is one of the icebreakers. What is a favorite political character in real life or in fandom? Andy, what do you think? What's one of your favorite political characters?
So I'm going to go very on brand here.
Okay.
One of my early gateways into comics was Peter David's X Factor in the '90s, when the team was a government sponsored group, and their government liaison was Val Cooper, and so she's been she was a central figure to my early comic book reading, and she's one of those characters you love to hate a little bit. She was always the very much the straight man to all the very colorful personalities on X Factor in those days, so that made her an interesting foil. And then it was especially fun when she got moments to shine a little bit, or moments to get her to get one up on everybody else.
Yeah, that's a good recommendation. The Peter David run on X Factor, really good comic book and storytelling. And if you like the X-Men or just like superheroes and the tension between what heroes the government wants you to do or not, that's there for sure. Now, is Val Cooper, is she on this new X-Men 97 cartoon?
She was. I was pleasantly surprised to see to see her show up. I had to stick through the credits because I don't think they named her in the first episode. But I was like, well, that has to be Val Cooper, and I stuck through the credits to see, and sure enough, that's who it was.
There it is. Yep, there you go. Come back around again. The run of the 90s, and then, man, here we are again. 1997, is the set, it was when it was set, and here we are 2024. So I think that's a good pull. Nice. Yeah, I'll share I'm tempted when it comes to political characters to say like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Abraham Lincoln. But if we're gonna be able to say real life or fandom, I'm gonna say T'Challa. I like him and Wakanda and this whole aspect of this other civilization that's technologically advanced in Africa, and we've seen it played in the movies. But like him wanting to be a hero, but yet leading his people, not isolating himself from others, but also being a part of the whole world, but also understanding how to protect his people and country and nation. That tension that's there is a very political character because he's a leader, he's a king, but he also has a people to rule and figure out what's best for them. So I'm going to go with T'Challa right now. Might answer it different tomorrow, but that's what I'm going for now. So as we shared, we're going to talk about the X-Men, Inhumans, Eternals. They're big. They were long comic books in the 60s and onward, way before they were mentioned on the big screen with all these phases when it comes to the MCU and as Andy shared about who owns the property rights to these characters and who can they put them on screen and how can they make money behind that. We're going to talk primarily about their origins in comics and kind of how they relate to the political life of the Marvel comic book universe and then how they relate to ours. And so we'll talk about that a little bit and then tie it back in to perhaps what we're hopeful for in terms of the MCU and what could happen there. So all right, here we go. X-Men, the origins and the political metaphor that they represent. Just to share a little bit about their origins and their history. So the X-Men debuted in X-Men #1 in September of 1963 with Jack Kirby and Stan Lee behind the creative team behind them. And these are teenagers that were born mutants. And so part of their origin behind the scenes is that Stan Lee was having a hard time just dreaming up origin stories for all kinds of heroes. And so he kind of cheated a little bit with the X-Men and said, you know what, they were just born that way. And we don't have to explain their origins. They're just at some point when they hit puberty, their X gene's gonna fire up and they're gonna get a superpower, and you can make up whatever superpower you want them to have for whatever particular mutant it is. But around this is what was happening in the 60s, of course, civil rights. You had the civil rights movement and you had these teens that were seen as different or unique. And and Professor X is helping them and shielding them, protecting them, but also want to put out there to the world that they're not just freaks and geeks, but they are heroes that are there to defend humanity. They're not just the next step in human evolution, but they're also heroes. And so I think that's important. I mean, the way that Marvel comics have always operated is to kind of relate to the common persons. They're not just like a DC character superhero that's seen as a god, but the everyday person like Peter Parker, who's wrestling real life things and also being a hero. And so I think it really connected with folks here at this time. The X-Men became popular because you had these kind of nerds and geeks that are reading comic books and love superheroes, and they kind of related to the X-Men because they were seen as that way too, as different or freaks and geeks or whatever. So that's part of their origin and kind of their story behind them. Andy, what am I forgetting there? What is kind of the main theme or continuity that runs through X-Men all the way to the all new, all different X-Men to the 12 different teams that are now in the comic book stands?
Yeah, well, I think another thread that's interesting there, and speaking about politicized science, right? There was from the beginning, and then highlighted at different times, an undercurrent of the atomic bomb program and nuclear power and so forth, and the questions about safety, and obviously the devastation that was capable there, right? I think fairly early on, it was established that Beast, his parents or his father worked in nuclear science. It might have been a later retcon, but Professor Xavier's parents worked on the testing sites for the initial atomic bomb tests, along with the parents of some other early mutant characters. And so and they've been known as the children of the atom, right? And so it's not always a heavily highlighted aspect, but it's certainly it's something that's kind of there in the background, is that idea that they're the products of science and government activity and government exploration and exploitation of this vast power that can be both devastating, but also potentially very useful in terms of nuclear power plants and so forth. And just the questions that raise, and I think I'm not an expert on the history of the era, right? But I think that there were, it's clear from the comics that at least in terms of the writers of the X-Men in the '60s, there was some awareness of the science, but there were a lot of questions of just like, what does this mean? And maybe maybe radiation can do lots of things, or mutation can do all kinds of scary but also maybe exciting things. Atomic power, just like magnetism, could do anything in early X-Men comics.
Yeah, good. I like that. And so there's this that era. What does Stanley used radiation a lot to radiate a spider or radiate cosmic radiation to create these heroes. Rather not just getting cancer, but a mutation that perhaps give you superpowers. And so what's the potential for humanity? What's the next step in evolution? So if we've evolved and kind of look at evolution from where we've been and where we are and where we're going, it's fun to play around with the sci-fi and the comic book superheroes, as maybe there's a next step in evolution. And so you have Professor X, who is trying to take these kids under his wing in a school to teach them how to use their powers and how to be a hero. It's a school, right? It's a boarding school. But adjacent to that is Magneto with his Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, who are tired of being looked down upon and seen as different and persecuted. And so he's going to rebel and fight and say, look, we're going to take over. We're not going to be pushed around. We are the next step in evolution, and so we're going to use that and lord it over humans. And so you got this tension between Magneto and Professor X with their understandings of how to use their power, how to use their mutant abilities. And so it's been akin to talking about the difference between Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, and kind of Black nationalism, along with the civil rights sit-ins and peace movements and marches that go along with that. I think that was kind of in the back of the mind of there with the creative teams there at Marvel, but it's evolved from there to talk about really anyone who is persecuted or looked down upon because they're different. I think as of late, the queer community have identified with the X-Men as a group that are looking for civil rights and to be seen as fully human and not different or down upon or anything less than because of who they feel like they were born to be. And so that's there as of late within the comics as well, and even the movies and cartoons. And I wouldn't be surprised if they highlight some of that in the X-Men 97 cartoon as well. But yeah, well, I mean, this tension between Magneto and Professor X in terms of, we've talked about before in terms of some of the comics we love, but Magneto he's Jewish, and he comes out of his family heritage from the Holocaust and being persecuted. He doesn't want to see that happen again. So yeah, America defended that, or it's like, yeah, we're going to help stop this in World War II, and maybe a little too late. But yeah, there's that allyship that comes with that. But yet, Magneto's like, nope, we're not going to let this happen again, where Professor X has a different way of doing it. What are some of your thoughts on those things? Because you've read a lot of X-Men comics like me. It's definitely there.
Yeah, I mean, the Magneto history and the backstory there gets pretty explicit at times. So yeah, that's an ongoing theme. I wish I could remember exactly where I came across this recently, but obviously, the nation of Israel and Palestine and so forth are in the news now, and in the context of all that, someone pointed out that there are different lessons that could be taken away from the Holocaust. One is that there should never be any more genocides,
right,
and the other is that there should never be any more. The Jews should never be treated that way ever again, and that they should be able to do anything within their ability to prevent that. And using that as a framing for the different perspectives on how to respond to the Hamas attacks that instigated the most recent series of events. And I think that is a useful way of kind of thinking about how Magneto is approaching this thing. Magneto seems at times to be more of that never again will my people be treated this way, as opposed to never again should anybody be treated this way. And I think that's kind of the subtext of a lot of the Magneto stories is somebody else coming up and opposing him and saying, no, just because it happened to you doesn't mean that it gives you license to do it to other people. And at times he comes to that realization on his own. At times he doesn't, and other people have to make that point instead. But I think some element of that is a useful part of his story. And I should also feel like I should point out that Magneto has a very complicated backstory that has been retconned at various different times, and at times he was also identified as possibly having Romani background as well. And I don't want to ignore other different folks that might have different identifications with that character and his various interpretations of his history.
Yeah.
Hey guys, Christian here to talk about our Captivate options. That's when you send us a little extra money to just help us along with our projects. But what do you get by giving us that extra money? Well, you have access to any future online D&D campaigns. You get extra bonus question content, which we do at least 48 times a month. You can make a one-time donation here of any amount to help support the show. This helps us with our overhead. That includes the editing software that we use, the recording software that we use, the marketing that we have to do for the show, the equipment that we all need to use to help out with the show, and more. So thank you for what you do. Head out to Captivate, help us out. We really appreciate what you do. See you later.
Yeah, and then it's a good point there. The stuff that we've wrestled with that we, in terms of the First and Second World Wars, but then also the civil rights movements in the 60s, and then here we are now in the 2020s. Similar themes that are there in terms of the tension between the political groups and what's happening in Israel and Palestine. Yeah, I mean, again, we've said it over and over and over again, but when people get upset that comics or their fandom or their movies are getting too political or have an agenda, we're like, it's always been that way. It's been there from the beginning, from Captain America to the X-Men, and what's going on there. And a big part of what's going on in the X-Men story is also the government legislating what they think is protecting humans against the mutants, and either putting them in camps or eradicating them or creating sentinel robots to hunt them down, to make people feel safe. There's that kind of xenophobia and othering. Oh, they're the ones I've never quite understood. It happens with Spider-Man with the Daily Bugle and Jonah Jameson, but people look up to Iron Man and Captain America and Thor and all these superheroes with powers, but yet X-Men are seen as like a threat. What's your take on why some superheroes are seen as great and we want to welcome them, we love them, they're our heroes, we idolize them, to the X-Men who are like, they're the threat, and we got to get rid of them?
Yeah, that's always been a good question, and I the only answer that really works for me is that they can reproduce, right? There will only ever be one Spider-Man, except for the fact that there's now 27 of them. But
Right.
there will always be one Thor until there's 2 or 3 or 4 Thors. But there's not some process by which these there's a population growth in Captain's America or Avengers or Fantastic Four in quite the same way. Whereas mutants are all over the world, and increasing in numbers. Anybody can have mutant kids. Mutants can have kids that are also mutants, and so you're talking about a group that has numbered in the millions in the world of the Marvel comics at times. And I think people that brings up fears of replacement or displacement, fears of, well, if we don't do it to them, they're going to do it to us, right? The world will be the ones in camps, or we'll be the ones who are subservient because they're more powerful than us. And so, I think that's, whether that's explicitly how it's written, and I'm not sure it's always been explicitly written that way. In fact, I'm not sure how often it has been explicitly written that way, but that's kind of how I make sense of it in my own head. Is you can't really imagine being oppressed by the Avengers, because there's only 7 of them and they can only be so many places at any given time, right? But a community or a people group of several million, that can form their own nation, their own economy. Now you can start to imagine how they could actually accomplish something on a global scale like that.
Super good point. And they do that in the comics too, like Genosha, and then they have Krakoa, these different ages where they have their own island, they have their own nation, they have their own economy, and the other nations feel threatened by it, and we see that in our own politics, in terms of seeing minority groups like, oh no, they're going to multiply, they're going to take over, and politicians use that as a way to fear. I'm watching political ads on my TV right now about, we got to watch the border, because if not, then they're going to take over or run over our world and change what you hold true and valuable. And so that kind of fear of they're going to multiply or replace us is definitely there. And I guess you're right. Yeah, in the comics, they're a different group because they're a whole subsection of group that can multiply and in that way. So yeah, good point. Good point.
And I think there's also that fear of, right, it could be anybody, and it could be my own kid, right? And that plays on a lot of people's fears as well, of like, you never know who you're talking to or who you're dealing with.
Yep. Good. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit some other things and the common things between them, but let's hop over to Inhumans and their origins and their political metaphor. And their origin, the Inhumans' first appearance was in Fantastic Four number 45, December 1965. So the X-Men were first, but here comes Inhumans with the Fantastic Four again. We have Jack Kirby and Stan Lee. You can hear Kirby a lot. He's the common thread in all these groups. You have them. And so they were kind of guest appearances and a part of Fantastic Four and Avengers and a few others being introduced, and they eventually had their own series. I think in 1975 is what I looked up. So they eventually had their own book, and they've been kind of had their own book and then canceled, and on their own book and canceled, and they're really no. So their history is that there's this whole backstory and legendary war in the Marvel comics, the Kree Skrull War. Two alien races, Skrulls, these kind of shape-shifting aliens, and then the Kree, this kind of advanced humanoid alien race that we saw in Miss Marvel and other or Captain Marvel, other kind of MCU properties, and their origin is that the Kree saw some potential in humans, and so kind of took a group of humans and genetically experimented with them and made them inhuman and made them superhuman and genetically modified them. So you have this kind of how do you say it? Terrigen,
Terrigen is how it, yeah.
Yeah, Terrigen mist that if you breathe in, it kind of fires up and it activates the genetic material within their body so that they have power similar to that of X-Men. So whether you have like super strong or super fast, or your hair, it can be like a Medusa and do those kind of things. We'll list some characters here in a moment, but yeah, those are the Inhumans. That's what's going on there. There's this royal family, and eventually they kind of take up and seclude themselves to a whole nother planet and area separate from humans. Humans don't know them as much. That's why they were like, oh, Fantastic Four just discovered them in the 60s. You have famous Inhumans like Black Bolt, who doesn't speak. He's very, very silent, because if he did speak, his superpower is that he has like super powered sonic voice or sound that comes from his mouth, his throat, and so he just kind of explodes and annihilates anything out there. So he's very, very quiet unless he needs to say something, and if he does say something out loud, it's destruction to everything around him. And then you have Karnak, who's a character who I absolutely love. He's like a kung fu expert. He can find weaknesses in anything. So if he's looking at a door, he can look at a hinge and see what the weakest hinge is, and like flick it or hit it and knock the door off the hinge, because he found the weakest point in that. And then also like my kneecaps. He could probably look at my kneecap, be like, that left knee, that's a weak part. He's gonna get there. And then you have like I said, Medusa. You have Crystal that controls like the elements and was at one point an Avenger, dated Johnny Storm at one point. And then you have Lockjaw, this big dog that can teleport. Lockjaw, the teleporting dog, who was genetically modified as well. So what do you know about the Inhumans other than the MCU really? So the MCU didn't own X-Men, Sony did. And so like, what's going to be the next big thing if we're going to introduce that to the world on the big screen with the MCU? Let's get the Inhumans. Let's do that. Let's make them as popular as the X-Men, so we can introduce them on the big screen or small screen and make some money off that. It did not quite work the same way. Andy, what's your knowledge of the Inhumans in the comics, and then kind of leading up to MCU? And then, there's some political, political ramifications to these guys.
Yeah. So, the other interesting thing, is kind of a flip side to the X-Men, right, is that the Inhumans came about because the Kree discovered that they couldn't evolve, or they had stopped evolving. There was no next step in Kree evolution. Why that happened exactly, I don't know. I don't know that anyone writing for Marvel had enough understanding of evolutionary biology to have a good explanation for that, but that's what it was. The Kree were not going to evolve, so they were trying to figure out some way to sort of jumpstart their evolutionary process again, or figure out some way out of that kind of dead end. And so that's where the Inhumans come from. So in a way, they sort of represent an opposite or contrast to the X-Men in that regard. I think the interesting question of why didn't the Inhumans work? I mean, part of it is just they were never as popular as the X-Men. Right, there was no Inhumans cartoon that had a loyal following in the 90s. Inhumans #1 didn't sell 5 million copies in 1991.
Yeah.
but I think also they're fundamentally different kinds of stories. The classic Inhuman story is much more in the vein of Game of Thrones, right? It's all about castle intrigue and who's going to sit on the throne, who's going to be the leader of the Inhumans. Because yes, they are sort of a people group, but the most the most significant characters are all either part of the royal family or related to the royal family, friends, loyal advisors or loyal friends of the royal family. And so it's much more of that kind of story than this sort of grand minority metaphor. They're not they're a minority group in the sense of that they're small in number, but they're also more of an aristocracy, right? I mean, aristocrats or the 1% or the 1% of the 1%. They're a minority in that, right? That's in that there's very few of them,
right?
But we don't regard them in quite the same way of being marginalized. And so, I guess that maybe that's the best way to frame it. Is that the Inhuman characters that we're familiar with are not marginalized; they are the aristocrats of their society, and they have their own in different versions of the story. They have their own people that they have sort of marginalized, or if enslaved is too strong of a term, at least indentured or exploited for labor and so forth. And so it's hard to identify or sympathize with the Inhumans in quite the same way, even though somebody like Crystal might be on the Avengers, or from time to time, they're still not quite the same. They don't register in quite the same way in terms of their background.
I think your point that you made about them being kind of more of Game of Thrones than, say, like these freaks and geeks teenagers who are being persecuted in society. But, in terms of the politics of them being kind of genetically modified and used and then bred, and then they have their own nation, their own thing. When Black Bolt shows up, and he's a strong silent type, he's not going to say much. You're like, oh snap, here we go. Is he going to say a word? There's this element of being threatened because he comes in, this king from this nation, that if he says one word, he's going to destroy the whole room around him. And then has advisors and those kinds of things. So I love that aspect. And then you get into like the politics of like, are we, in terms of, are we in control of our own evolution? Should we be in control, kind of scientifically engineering our own selves or species or animals? I think eugenics comes up to play when it comes, you're talking about Inhumans. We'll talk about the Eternals is a little bit like that as well. But in terms of Inhuman, what are we in charge of our own evolution, or what should we play God or not? The government, should it regulate that, or should we be on our own, like regulating science, aliens? Like there's a lot here with this group, even though they're not the most popular, superheroes in the Marvel universe, but they're always fun when they show up in cameos in other people's books, in stories or big events, because, things get serious when you do that. But some of the threads there, what are your thoughts in terms of us being in charge? You're a scientist, you work with some of these things and understand some of these things. What, for the common layperson, what is eugenics and how does that apply to Inhumans in our own world? In 5 minutes or less, Andy. No, I'm just kidding.
Sure. Eugenics was the idea that once we started to understand how inheritance worked, right? So we knew for many generations, that there were traits that occurred in animals and plants that you could breed, and if you wanted bigger sheep or tastier fruit or whatever, you'd find the things that find the animals that were the biggest, or find the fruits that were the tastiest, and breed those together, and keep doing that until you got really, really excellent results. So we had some notion that there are these traits that are inherited, and that they can be reproduced somewhat consistently, but also that there's some variability within a species. But it wasn't until the late 1800s, early 1900s that we began to understand more specifically what was behind that and how exactly that inheritance worked at a more conceptual level rather than just that empirical. Well, we know if we do this, we get these results kind of thing. That started with the very famous work of Gregor Mendel and his pea plants.
Right.
And then
Catholic priest, faith and science. You had a Catholic priest, genetics. There you go.
Yeah, and so his work was not widely known for a number of years, so it was kind of rediscovered in the early 1900s, and out of that developed a whole scientific field of genetics, and also a lot of statistics. A lot of what we know now about statistics comes from that same era, that same field of study. And with that came the thought, oh well, now that we know more about how these traits work and how they're transmitted and inherited and so forth, we can control that, and we should breed out the traits that we don't like. And you can be more or less extreme about that, right? Some of the more extreme versions that were enacted in various ways are sterilizing the people that you don't think should be allowed to reproduce, and obviously that opens up a lot of doors of, well, who gets to decide who what traits you don't want to carry forward, but also about just sort of allowing regulating who can marry whom and so forth, and so this was taken as some versions of this were taken as a serious science that academics, university professors were promoting and putting forward as a positive thing, that we this idea of eugenics, that we should select for, and basically we should select in humans for the traits that we think are most desirable, and we've it's fallen out of favor in academic circles. I don't think we've completely moved away from that. Variations of it, I think, are coming up now in light of CRISPR and the ability to more specifically engineer changes to genes, different things like that. And the phrase "designer babies" has been tossed around for many decades now. When is it appropriate to when you're doing something like in vitro fertilization, when is it appropriate to select out embryos that you think might be likely to have this issue or that issue, and then do you draw the line at serious disabilities or developmental issues? Do you select for positive traits? Do you select for attractiveness, intelligence, whatever you might decide is preferable? But I think the biggest points that I would make in a short period of time about that, one is that we are much more genetically mixed than we probably think that we are. There's very little evidence for any kind of isolated populations for any significant lengths of time in the human world, going back to the extent that we can look at such things. And so you might think that there are separate populations that have separate traits and that can be kept distinct, but really we've been mixing it up with everybody, for as long as we can trace back. So it's harder to isolate traits than you might think that it would be. And the other point that I think it's important to keep in mind is that the few examples that we have of very clear, like this gene causes this thing, whether it's like eye color, where we have a pretty clear understanding of like the allele that results in blue eyes versus brown eyes and so forth, or the thing that you might have done in high school where there's a certain taste that some people can taste and some people can't. So you have a little strip of paper and you put it on your tongue and you see whether it tastes like anything or not. Or things like cystic fibrosis that have been isolated to, or sickle cell anemia that have been isolated to fairly specific genetic changes. Those examples are well known because they are the few clear examples that we have, and the vast majority of traits are tied to probably the interactions of many genes over the course of our development and over the course of our lives, interacting to result in the traits that we observe. And so we don't know nearly enough about what causes some people to be more intelligent than others, or taller than others, or more attractive than others, or whatever dimension you want to think about. We don't know enough about that to actually be successful in saying, okay, we can make this change or that change and get people with the traits that we want. And it may even fundamentally not be possible. It may not simply be that, well, we don't know enough now. It may not be fundamentally possible to sort of separate out things in a clean, neat, well, we're going to get all these positives without any trade-offs kind of way.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that, because I think that's important, in terms of thinking about, our scientifically advanced society and what we can or can't do, should or shouldn't do. It has a political ramifications to it, just because politics means our common life together, and how do we have our common life together and explore and help those who are sick or not, or genetic defects. But then who's the one to say that this is attractive or not, or this is how tall you should be, or the color of your skin should be, those kinds of things. And you brought up Game of Thrones earlier with the Inhumans, but then them isolating. The House of the Dragon, the spinoff, it talks about like, how do you keep it in the royal family, and like there's so much there's incest in there because they want to keep it in the blood of their thing. So there's been parts of human history where they wanted to keep the royal line more pure, but that's not as helpful. We've learned that that's not helpful in a family tree to keep all your genes like that packed. It's just not in the long run, it's not a healthy way. So how to not isolate yourselves, but have that family tree spread out with its branches, its roots, and its fruits is a big part of how development in our world works. And so yeah, within the politics of Inhumans, you have this kind of isolationist. You also have them protecting their own, but then how do they mix up with the rest of the world that feels threatened by them too? That's a part of that story. And interesting enough, when we talk about the X-Men, there's been a lot of conversations in certain runs of their comics of trying to find a quote unquote cure for mutants, right? Joss Whedon's run, we're going to find a way to cure this defect, this mutant. We're going to cure it because mutants are like, I just want to be normal, whatever that means. I don't want to feel like I'm being persecuted. So I want to cure from this mutant gene that I have. But then what's the next step? So what do we cure or not cure? What ramifications does it have? I think is a big part of this conversation. And it's a big part, you're in immunology, am I saying that right? What are you're in, you look at diseases out there and what we're immune or not immune to, and we're just coming off a pandemic. Those are important things and conversations to have. What should we do? What should we not do? And how is it funded? Who's backing it? All that stuff has political tension to it. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So much there. All right, we could, each one of these groups could have their own episode, but here we go. Eternals, their origins and political metaphor. All right, origins. Where they began? They began in July 1976. You know who their creator was? Take a guess. You got it right.
Does it rhyme with Smack Murby?
Yeah, it does. Jack Kirby. And part of that history is that he went over to DC for a little while, created New Gods in the early 70s, and it was a big hit. He had a falling out with DC and came back over to Marvel, and Marvel was like, hey, let's do what you did with New Gods, except over here at Marvel. So he created the Eternals. Their story is that these cosmic godlike beings from the beginning of time, the Celestials, saw and found Earth and said, oh, this is a soil ripe for genetically modifying or speeding up the evolutionary process, and we create these super beings. And they also created not so super beings called deviants. And you have these two different types of creature, one a monster, one a hero. You could get a little bit about you could go down the road of us and them and othering, even with the deviants, poor deviants sometimes, they're just seen as monsters. They were manipulated too. But these Eternals were protectors of the earth. That's their purpose. They're behind the scenes. You saw that if you watch the Eternals movie, that they're kind of a secret underneath society, there to protect humans. Even if you don't know they're out there protecting you from the monsters, from the deviants. There's some history there of a civil war that happened within them. Again, politics of these Eternals. One group thought, yeah, hey, they should rule over humans. Another said, nope, we should protect them. So there you go. Again, how do you use your power, responsibility, your superheroes responsibly? There you go. So yeah, you have different generations of the Eternal. The latest one, the third generation, or the one that they lifted up in the MCU, is like Icarus and Sprite and Ajax and Cersei and Thena, who was played by Angelina Jolie. Like all that was a part of the Eternals, and there's some similarities. And again, as we said, to the X-Men, to Inhumans, in terms of how they were created and manipulated, and then what do they do with their power now that they have it, and what do they how do they express themselves or protect the world that was entrusted to them. Yeah, Andy, what's your thoughts on Eternals? They tried real hard to make that the next big thing. Didn't quite work in the MCU, but interesting that it was a Jack Kirby creation, and there's some good story runs in the art, and some of the stuff's out there. Some Neil Gaiman even wrote a good run on the Eternals as well.
Yeah, the Eternals are interesting. There is overlap with the X-Men. The history with the deviants and so forth has been linked to sort of creating the potential for eventually the mutants to come around. Jack Kirby loved a grand narrative, it seemed, especially as his career went on, or at least maybe as his career went on, he was given more opportunity to explore what he was always interested in, but hard to say. But
right.
He loved this sort of grand narrative and kind of tying everything together. And there's maybe something interesting to explore there in terms of, maybe we'd be suspicious of efforts to kind of tie everything up together. Sometimes things just are the way they are, right? And there isn't some grand scheme behind that. But that's in the world of politics, that's a popular move to make, right? Is to try to cast everything into this grand narrative to make everything fit into a neat storyline. There's also, you get into, to what extent are they godlike characters because they've been around for 10,000 years. They're obviously named for mostly Greek mythological figures. As with certainly in the movie, just like they did with Thor, they kind of play with the, are these characters inspiration for these different mythologies? Does that make them real gods? Does that make them not real gods? What does that even mean? We've seen that in the comics. The tension. There's clearly writers who want it to just sort of be, these are sci-fi characters who have an explanation just like everything else, and other writers who much more want them to be supernatural. And I think the movies, especially with Thor, have had that tug back and forth too. Where Thor was explicitly introduced as, well, they're not really gods; they're just aliens with more advanced technology.
Right.
But by the time we get to the most recent movie, right, he's he goes to the city where all the gods hang out, and the question of who gets worshipped and who doesn't get worshipped is a big part of it. And you got to start to go, we're really pushing the boundaries of just advanced aliens.
Yep, I agree.
You get into those kinds of questions with the Eternals as well. You get into questions of the fashion value of denim jackets. Cersei was famously a member of the Avengers in the denim jacket era. There's also to what extent, certainly in Kieran Gillen's recent take on the Eternals, in the storyline represented by the background art here, they come across as almost like artificial intelligence, right? They've kind of been programmed. They're more robotic than biological, and so there's questions there too about control and who's in control and who what role you have in your own choices versus who's sort of determining them. and that's kind of one of the realizations that the Eternals come to over the course of their story. And I recall over the course of the movie as well, in a different plot, but a similar kind of theme of, we aren't who we thought we were. Our purpose isn't exactly what we thought it was. And what do we do about that? Can we do anything about that? And if so, what? Or are all these revelations that we're having and all these choices that we think we're not making, are they just another layer of the programming that we've discovered?
Yeah, that's a good point too, because once you feel like, I'm here for this particular purpose, but then you kind of pull back the veil a little bit, and you see there may be some, excuse the pun, deviant activities behind the scenes of what you're programmed for, and you start questioning yourself. And I think that's kind of going on in our society with institutions. There's distrust because, like, hey, what are you trying to manipulate me for? What's your agenda here? Are you just trying to make a profit off of me? Are you just using me as a way to stay in power if I vote for you? Do you really have my common interest and good at heart, or are you just trying to do something to stay in office, and using the xenophobia to pit me against others? So I think that's there. I like to think Eternals as kind of X-Men and Inhumans kind of put together. If you put X-Men and the Inhumans together, you have this royal line and family, and they've been around a long time. They have their own society. Same way with the Eternals. They have their own society. They have their own pecking order and matriarchs and patriarchs who've been around a long time, and they have their own agreements and disagreements, similar to, like, as you said, the Greek gods do, in the pantheon of things. But the X-Men are just trying to make it and live their lives in this world, regardless of their genetic makeup or being a mutant. So put all those together, you have Eternal. So I think these three groups do, deserve some attention when we're talking about our fandoms and talk about our political leanings and what kind of mirror it holds up and how we relate to the other person, how it relate to the other group. And so really what's behind all this is the politics of othering, or the xenophobia, the fear of that which is foreign or different from us. And then us feeling like we need to stay in the lifeboat. There's no extra room in this lifeboat. So who gets to stay? There's 5 societies in here, and it can only hold room for 4. So we're going to make sure we get rid of the other one. What are we going to do to prove ourselves or kick them out of the boat? The boat being the world, our earth, So, to kind of summarize all these things together, what comes to mind for you, Andy, when it talks about, the other? We do it in the church too, where people of faith, whether there's other denominations, other religions, people who don't baptize the same way that we do, those kinds of things. Oh, those other people down the road are doing it. Martin Luther did it. Lutherans are known. As a Lutheran pastor, Lutherans are known for defining themselves who they're not rather than for who they are. Oh, we're not Catholic. Oh, we're not this. We're not that. So that's the temptation and danger for us. But yeah, the politics of othering, xenophobia, is out there, and it's big in this year's political race for sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, there's a lot to say, but I'm not sure there's anything to say. You've covered a lot. I'm finding myself thinking about Life of Brian, right? And who our worst enemy? Oh, the People's Front of Judea, right? That when they're supposed to be against the Romans, but they're all, we're the Judean People's Front. We hate the People's Front of Judea, or what? I apologize for not remembering the dialogue exactly, but
it's so good. We talked about that at some point. Yeah, Life of Brian's up there. Yeah,
such a good caricature of what you say goes on all the time. The only people we hate more than the people who are our exact opposite are the people who are supposed to be our allies, but are just a little bit different from us. And I mean, that it's clearly a fundamental part of human nature, human experience. It's arguably from the Christian tradition, it goes back to Cain and Abel, right? That they had very different takes on the world, and it became a wedge between them. So it's just something I think we constantly have to decide, if it's important to us to work against that, or to give into it. I think, it's challenging when there is real evil and there are people who really do seek our harm. And I think it's, the challenge is separating, is is taking everybody on their own terms, right? We aren't equipped to know 8 billion people personally. That's just
Right.
not something that we have the mental toolkit to do. And so we take shortcuts. The human brain does an amazing job of applying heuristics and taking shortcuts all the time. And so putting people into groups and making inferences about what people are like based on past experiences, and other people is a very useful shortcut, and it allows us to make decisions that would otherwise be impossible to compute, because we would just be waiting for more data or waiting to crunch all the numbers in a way that may not ever terminate. And so the fact that we do have these brains that are able to implement these heuristics is very useful, but it does have the downside that that's kind of the path we go down sometimes, is just kind of lump people into groups, or make assumptions about people that have nothing to do with them personally, but based on other individuals, or even some characteristic that we've been told about a group. And therein lies the challenge, right? Is we have been harmed by one person, and so we impute the responsibility for that harm by everybody that we think is like that person, whether they are whether their ethnicity or their nationality or their gender or their orientation or whatever it might be. We impute that harm or the responsibility for that harm more broadly. And I think the only option, or the only alternative is to kind of put in the work of, nope, that person did do us harm, and there may be a need to resolve that, to see justice brought about, or whatever the case might be. But that does not carry over to anybody else. Everybody else gets to be taken on their own terms with a fresh start. That's hard. It will not always work, and sometimes we'll get burnt, right? Because that will open us up to hurt from other people in completely different ways. But the alternative is this kind of othering and just kind of lumping people together, and it doesn't take long before that leads to putting people in camps, or putting people in sterilizing people, or different all these different things that we have real historical examples of happening. Often with the best of intentions, or with understandable motivations to begin with.
Well said, Andy. I appreciate all that. And I think, the reason we do sci-fi, the reason we do superhero books of fiction, is to play around with these ideas and do it in a safe way, in a sandbox that we can kind of play around with those ideas. When real humans talk about it, can almost get too close, too dark, and we're like, I don't know if I can handle that. But we're playing around with this in kind of imaginary world, or within our creativity of how to tell stories. It helps us iron out and think through these things a little better. So I think these groups can help us do that. And it just blows me away when the message boards are like, wow, the X-Men are too political, or that's going to like, God, what are we doing? But the world is getting smaller, and it used to be I just could only handle with my own family and my own tribe and my own little tiny village. But now the village is getting larger, and not just the village next to us, but all around the world. And so it's hard to take in all this information all at one time. And so it can get pretty scary, especially when somebody can manipulate that to help us or urge us or lure us to thinking that we're threatened when we may not be. But I'm not anti-border. I'm not anti-boundaries. I think those things are necessary, because humans are going to human, and they're going to hurt each other. So how do we do that? How do we inflect? How do we make sure that proper just laws are out there and keeping ourselves safe, while also being aware that our implicit and pretty wide out in the open biases against other people, where they look different or talk different or orient in a different way, I think is something for us to really kind of check out and look in the mirror and and make sure we hold each other accountable for that. These heroes can do that, and to be careful of othering other people, xenophobia. Jesus did not do that. In terms of the lifeboat game, Jesus didn't play the lifeboat game. They were like, "Who deserves to stay in the boat?" And he's like, "Oh, let me ask you a different question. Who is your neighbor? Let me tell you your story about a Samaritan. And let me tell you a story about someone who helped somebody on the side of the road and who didn't help the person on the side of the road." So Jesus didn't even play the game. He didn't even answer the question. He's like, the boat's big enough for everyone. And so how do we manage that together in our common life together in politics? So there you go. Folks, there. Message us on the message boards for certain recommendations when it comes to Inhumans and the Eternals and X-Men, especially X-Men. Andy and I have a lot. But there's also this whole backdrop of like the Illuminati in the Marvel Universe, where Professor X is a part of, and Black Bolt. I don't think there's an Eternal on the Illuminati, but there's this whole, I don't think so.
Not yet.
That's probably not yet. They'll retcon that. If the movie had done better, maybe they would have put him on. Put somebody on there. But yeah, like there's a whole thing that Bendis did with that was fun at the time. Haven't gone back and read it, but thinking through all these political things in there. So yes, well, let's wrap this thing up. We have one final question here, just to lighten the mood as we think about, what the political tensions in our world. All right, Andy, one, what's your favorite movie? And then what's your real life political leader that probably would enjoy that movie with you?
So I've already had the opportunity to answer this question once.
Oh, that's right, because you're on the Captain America episode, right? Yeah. Talk about that's right.
So I'll mix it up a little bit here.
Okay.
Another movie that I'm very fond of is Arrival, the Denis Villeneuve sci-fi alien encounter film of a few years ago.
Yes.
And I think it would be interesting to watch that movie with JFK. Whether he would like it or not, I don't know what his taste in movies was like, or if he'd like to watch movies. But I just think as an architect of the space race and the space program, it would be interesting to watch a film like that, or maybe even something like Apollo 13 about actual space program. But yeah, that was kind of the direction I was going in this time.
That is nice. I agree. I think being someone that pioneered the space race and funded it and did all those things, that'd be fun to watch Arrival with him. And then if the technology we have with special effects and showing all that stuff and how those creatures communicated with us with the kind of the ink stuff. Oh man, It's such a good movie. And then it deals with like the human aspect of grief and sickness and so good, man. That is an amazing movie. I'm going to go a little, not as deep as that. My favorite movie of all time is Empire Strikes Back, just because Star Wars hit me at that time in my life. And then there's nothing more anticipated in my life at that time than Empire. And when it came out, I was blown away, loved it. And I've loved it ever since. It's my favorite Star Wars movie. And it's up there at the top when you say, what's your favorite movie? That's one that comes to mind. And I would like to, I'm thinking of all the presidents. I'm thinking of all the leaders that are out there. And, I think I'm going to watch that with Obama, just because I think we could kick back with some popcorn after we could shoot hoops. We should play basketball, or maybe he's been windsurfing in Hawaii. We'll catch a couple waves. And then at the end of the day, we're watching, Empire Strikes Back, and there are dark times. It's the Empire does strike back, but yet there's still hope out there. Some big revelations, and I would love to see that movie with Obama if he had never seen Empire Strikes Back before, and he didn't know the big reveal. I'm sure he's seen it before. He's older, but what if it was the first time he'd ever seen it, and he didn't know that Vader was Luke's father? And that I would love to see his reaction. There's reaction videos of kids there watching that for the first time, and they see the big reveal. I would like to pretend that Obama's never seen the movie. He's seen it for the first time. And I want to see his reaction to the big reveals in that movie. I think that'd be fun. Boom. There you go, y'all. Well, thanks for being a part of this episode. Andy, thanks for all our listeners out there. We know there's a lot of choices, and a lot of things to geek out on. So we're glad that you're part of this movement that we have at Systematic Geekology and geeking out with us. Like us, follow us, friend us, share it with a friend. Let people know we're out there. And then if you have an idea for an episode and or you have a favorite political character, then let us know. We'll be happy to talk about it and share about later on. Andy, thanks for being a part of this episode. And always remember, share the faith, share the geek.
If you'd like to support our show, please consider joining our Patreon, where you get live access to our YouTube exclusives, including our comic book catch-up, manga mustard, drinks with Tejas, and our companion series that we do each year with our annual theme. You can also get exclusive merch, including t-shirts, handbags, a coffee mug, and a long sleeve shirt. We also have available bonus extra questions at the end of most of our podcast episodes. You get access to exclusive Discord channels, discounts on our store, access to any future online D&D campaigns. You get to vote on topics for some of our episodes. You can easily access all of the Patreon content right through Spotify now. So super easy. Go to our Spotify page at the top. It's going to say exclusive content for subscribers. If you're a patron, hit that button. You get all of our bonus content right there on Spotify, right with your regular feed. And of course, you get the satisfaction of knowing you helped a podcast in need. Our overhead includes editing software, marketing equipment, recording software, and a lot more. And there's a lot that goes into keeping the lights on here. And we really appreciate all of our patron subscribers for helping the show happen.
Hey friends, this is your pal, Will Rose, and I have some exciting news. Systematic Geekology will return to Theology Beer Camp this year, October 17th through the 19th in Denver, Colorado. And we hope that you can join us. We are part of Theology Beer Camp in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, at my home church in my hometown. And that year, Theology Beer Camp was called the God Pods. And then we were in Missouri, a part of the Geek Stage. Yes, we had a whole entire Geek Stage where we had workshops and speakers and had incredible conversations. And Theology Beer Camp last year was called the God Pods Strike Back. So you kind of see where this is going. And so this year, the theme is the return of the God Pods. And so if you head over to Eventbrite and follow God Pods 2024, or hop over to Instagram, follow it there. And if you enter promo code Geekshire, you see what we did there? Yeah. Wilbo Baggins approves. If you enter Geekshire, all caps, no spaces, you'll get $25 off your ticket price. Geekshire, all caps, no spaces, Geekshire. Yeah, say it with me, Geekshire. Enter that. You get money off your ticket, and you can join us and hang out and drink beer and have great food. And even if you don't drink beer, you can have incredible food and beverages and conversations with your favorite hosts here at Systematic Geekology. The Geek Stage is growing. I'm proud of that, and we thank Trip for this opportunity. We hope to see you at Theology Beer Camp, the Return of the God Pods 2024.